Good morning, and I would like to, first of all, thank you for this invitation. Mr. James Potonick, Chairman of the RISE Foundation and Chair of this forum, 2016. I was very glad to hear the numbers you showed and the concerns you expressed. I think that it paves the way because we have the same approach. I think this is now a very positive aspect, that we know what is happening and we know what are the main problems. Perhaps we agree on the diagnosis, but certainly we don't agree on the solutions, and there is where the problem. So let me start it taking the last words of Joachim Steiner. As you have seen, I believe Steiner is one of the most brilliant, if not the most brilliant, behind this SDG approach. I will take his last words. He said more or less at the end that we will need to reinvent agriculture in the next years. That is not anymore about to produce more food, more commodities. We will need to look to produce more safety food, more nutritious food, to address other issues. I have to say from FAO point of view that we have succeeded in the sense of, let's say, reducing the number of hungry people. I have to say that last time we reinvented agriculture in the 70s with the Green Revolution, we avoid the word to face hunger in a way that we were not prepared to. I think now that we have now the same problem. We have to complete one unfinished agenda that is tackle with the impacts of climate change, that part of it comes from what we have been doing by farming, in a, let's say, try to avoid the impact on the natural resource. So my approach today will first start with the SDGs, the importance of them, and then come some specific problem, particularly with climate change, that I believe is posed the most difficult for our future, and that's why I'm talking about reinventing agriculture. The first point that I would like to make about the SDGs is that they are universal. We will need a global approach for them. All the countries are involved, and not only developing countries as we had with the MDGs before. Now we have a global agenda, and every country has responsibility and targets. Also, I have to say that the SDGs are interlinked. The 17 SDGs are close related one to another, so it's not possible to address one specific, but we need to approach all of them. But at the same time, it will be impossible for all countries to do all these things in the same way with the same priority. It's quite impossible. Just to let you know, we have more than 150 targets to achieve. Most of the countries will need to rebuild their national statistics system, their national information system, to have their baselines and to have the way to monitor those targets. This will not be easy for developed countries, not to say about the less developed countries and poor countries. So we will need, in some sense, to make some priorities, a few priorities for each country, for each region. One of these priorities, no doubt, is to address the poor. And among the poor, unfortunately, we have what has been said, smallholder farmers. We in FAO, we prefer to call them by their names, family farmers. Family farmers are the most poor nowadays. They are not only the ones that are responsible for feeding the world, or most of the basic foods, staple foods produced around the world. But they are among the 80% of the extremely poor people that live in rural areas nowadays. And rural areas are the areas that are concentrating the poor. Fortunately, the poor, when they want to leave poverty, they come to the cities where they have service providers, and they will help them to overcome poverty. So one main issue that we need to keep in mind is that we will need, as part of the unfinished agenda, to come back to rural development. Rural development is among one of the main priorities, because we have been talking about wasting food and loss. But you know, most of important part of the food that we lose is due to lack of good transportation means, roads, facility, and storage capacity. Something that we abandoned during the 70s, thinking that there was a global market like a supermarket, a big Carrefour of the world that could provide you all the food you need at all time. That has been proven not true, unfortunately, and we will now need to rebuild this. What I'm trying to say is that also it's very important not to, only to look to the production side. We have achieved a lot of progress in the production side. We need to look of the whole value chain, and we need to look particularly to transforming our food systems. As I said, we got some good results in pulling down the number of hungry people, despite we have nowadays around 800 million people hunger, but we overcome famine in most of the areas, and we have now concentrated hunger people related to conflict. If we look nowadays where we have the worst case of hunger, are regions that are under protected crisis and conflicts, due to natural causes or due to civil war and armed conflicts. But at the same time that we pulled down the hunger numbers, we have seen an epidemic growth of obesity, just to say an example. Obesity now affects 500 million people around the world and is growing very rapidly, especially among children and women. So this is related to the way we have been promoting our food, the way our consumers make their choice. So it would be very important for the future that the consumers could have better opportunity to make their choice. So one of particularly important thing is about labeling. We need to provide better information to our consumers. Also about propaganda. We need to regulate propaganda, especially propaganda in the schools, in the canteens, that the children have access. Of course, one of the priorities for FAO, as Ashin already said, is to reduce food waste and loss. We have this campaign. Education, consumer education is very important in this aspect, because we waste a lot of food also, due to cultural issues, due to ignorance, and many other things. We need to change this, and we can do it in a short time. But let me come to the most challenge, that is the impact of climate change. I will not need to tell you the things you already know about typhoons, hurricanes, etc., etc. Just remember you, last week we hosted in FAO a discussion about the El Niño and the impacts of the El Niño around the world. And we brought to be the keynote speaker, Michel Jarraud. Michel Jarraud is a former director of the World Meteorological Organization. And he is a scientist that started to collect information about climate at 10 years old, as he said. And what he feels now is all that data that he collected, he can throw out. It doesn't help him to forecast, to see what will happen in the future. That is the uncertainty that climate change is posing for us now. Something similar to what Keynes used to define the speculators in the market economy, that they beats on the uncertainty. They just don't know what's going to happen. They make a choice. That's what happened with farmers. We cannot really provide them accurate information about if it's going to rain or not next season. What should they cultivate now? A variety more resistant to drought or to a flood? We just don't know. That's the problem for the future. And that brings all those instability that we have nowadays. So better information, make information a public good for farmers, provide them about accurate information that we have, how we can forecast meteorological and other kinds of information will be crucial. Again, and I come back to the issue of the need better statistics and better information at country level, but also to provide this information available to farmers. Let me start to move to close, and I would like to make two comments. The first one is that, as I mentioned, the SDGs as a universal approach. We need all the countries to be working on that. But we need also not only mobilize governments, we need to mobilize the societies. And in that sense, it's very important to have civil society and private sector working together with governance. And we don't have this governance implemented already in most of the countries. There is no that system that brings civil society, private sector, and government working together in agriculture sectors. We will need to do that. Second comment. Governments are, most of them, structured in silos. We have the Minister of Agriculture that don't work with nutrition, because nutrition is about the Minister of Health. And sometimes they are from different parties. They don't get together for nothing, except to fight about the budget. And nowadays, the problem is not only produce more food, as I said in the beginning, but more nutrition and healthy foods, and to advise consumers about that. So ministers of agriculture, livestock, and ministers of health need to get together, not only among them, but also together with ministers of environment, ministers of forestry, water management, and so on. We don't have these structures in our governance. Our governance is still old-fashioned, looking for silos by silos approach. That will not help us manage the SDGs. We need to change the way the governments approach those problems. Finally, a last comment. It is about the possibility for us to the new technology that we have available nowadays to become accessible to family farmers. There is only one possibility, in my opinion, if family farmers are organized, if they get together. If alone, one by one, will be impossible. And we have so many new tools coming, so many new technologies available that we don't know. Most of family farmers don't know even the Green Revolution technology. Most of the family farmers are only using their own hands and traditional systems. Not against traditional systems, but we need all the tools available, all possibilities to face the challenge of climate change in the near future. We have been in FAO working with different approach. In 2013, we convened a meeting about agroecology. It's a very promising new set of technologies that are being available in some areas. This year, early February, we convened a meeting about biotechnologies. And we found out that the second and third generation of new biotechnology left the controversial GMOs as part of the past. We have so many new opportunities now, including an approach to make compatible the new biotechnology with agroecology. That is really a good promise for the future. So we are, let's say, up to build a new green revolution. Some people have been also, some scholars saying a green, a double green, or something more than green revolution to face the impacts of climate change and address the change for the new agriculture that we need. This is an issue of survival for the future of humanity. We have been struggling this fight against nature for a long time. Now we have to, as the people that practice jiu-jitsu, to take their own force to help us to adjust and adapt to the nature that we want to transform. Not only to transform it, but recover from what we did in the past and prepare the future for the new generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Silva, do take a seat. I thank you so much for that contribution. We want you to stay and just perhaps take a seat right there.
Thank you.
Because we will have time for some question and answer in just a moment, and we'd love you to be involved. But now, ladies and gentlemen, having had a global perspective from the Food and Agriculture Organization, let us specifically think about what Europe needs to do to meet the challenges that we're laying out before you today. And for that, who better than the Commissioner for Agriculture here in Brussels? So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Phil Hogan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, José, for your very insightful intervention. I'd also like to take the opportunity of thanking Achim Steiner for, of course, very, as usual, thought-provoking and sometimes provocative intervention earlier this morning. He sets the scene quite well. I suppose I wish to make the case that the European Union is stepping up to the plate, maybe better than we've heard already today, both at home and abroad, when it comes to taking a leadership role in sustainable development. And the Agenda 2030, of course, is universal. This means that our commitments under the Sustainable Development Goals apply to both our external and internal policies. And I also want to make it clear that sustainable agriculture is central to this leadership. And today I want to confirm the integration of Sustainable Development Goals into the Common Agricultural Policy, into our agricultural research and innovation policy, and into our agri-food trade policy. The Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement have given us a clear roadmap for sustainable development in the years to come. And of course, without meaningful implementation on the ground, these goals will continue to be just aspirational. So to achieve progress, there has to be a prominent role for sustainable agricultural policy. We are witnessing an increasing focus on agricultural policy in all international fora, particularly when it comes to global sustainability. And among the Sustainable Development Goals, there are particular priority areas identified for agriculture, notably the Zero Hunger target by 2030 in SDG 2, In SDG 12, there's an emphasis on the sustainable use of resources and climate action through responsible consumption and production. Climate action, of course, is the priority of SDG 13, while life on land, in other words, how we manage our forests, or how we tackle our land degradation and stop biodiversity loss, is the focus of SDG 15. And we're all familiar with the challenges that underpin these goals. As global population growth continues to accelerate, the world has to produce more and better food. And in the 21st century, with our knowledge, our wealth and our technology, no one should have to experience systemic hunger. But that same population growth will put greater pressure on our environment and our resources, as other speakers have mentioned. So the way we think about food and the way we produce food has to adapt accordingly. We know the world possesses enough available land. We know that water is under pressure. We know that we have people with the highest qualifications to try and make these policies happen. But we already have much of the technology and know-how to tackle both hunger and climate change. We already produce enough to feed the world, but we waste a significant amount of this food. So the challenge is a political one. How can we organize ourselves to make zero hunger a reality? It is a substantial challenge and a great responsibility, resting in part on the shoulders of everybody in this room. As Commissioner, I'm responsible for the implementation of the CAP. And still today, it's the only EU policy fully funded and administered from Brussels. The CAP has changed to reflect a changing world, but I firmly believe that it can evolve even further. So I'd like to present you briefly with an overview of what the CAP is currently doing to help Europe meet its SDG commitments. I'd like to show you where we aim to be even more ambitious. It is true that the CAP in the past did not have a strong emphasis on sustainable development. But the objectives for establishing the Common Agricultural Policy back in 1958 were much different. We must remember that we had people in Europe who were starving. They didn't have enough food after World War II. But now we have a policy that is more outward-looking and traditionally getting away from the inward-looking and more protectionist policy. Going away from the 1980s, where we had milk lakes, wine lakes, butter mountains, to a more market-orientated policy. But the Common Agricultural Policy today continues to guarantee a decent livelihood for our farmers and our businesses. And it has three objectives in the latest reform: viable food production which contributes to food security, sustainable use of resources, and balanced territorial development of our rural areas. But the policy has also become far more outward-looking and more plugged into the global economy. This means that European farmers and agribusinesses are competing in international markets to sell their products. And it means a more global outlook and a more nuanced understanding of the policy's impact on other parts of the world. And in line with the aims of SDG 2, the CAP contributes to correct and prevent trade restrictions and distortions in global markets due to this increased market orientation. It also prioritizes sustainable food production systems and resilient agricultural practices to improve the ecological performance of European agriculture. This is beneficial for Europe's contribution to other SDGs, be it in terms of enhancing the sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources or combating climate change and its impacts. And thanks to our EU rural development policy, the CAP can be considered as a role model for keeping lives and livelihoods in rural areas. We aim to support sustainable rural communities by providing them with the economic opportunities and the social and cultural cohesion that they need. The CAP is now more aligned with other EU policies, in particular agricultural trade and research. This means a continuing focus on healthy and quality products without hampering Europe's very open access for agricultural products from developing countries. We provide a wealth of opportunities for third countries to adopt our best practice and benefit from knowledge spillover. Looking at climate and the environmental dimension, while moving towards a stronger market orientation, the CAP has reorientated itself to improve environmental performance and to contribute to the provision of public goods not remunerated by the market. In the 2014-2020 period, 30% of CAP funding will support farmers' incomes on the basis of environmental and resource-friendly production methods. And nearly half the budget for rural development programmes is spent on a series of measures which benefit the environment or the fight against climate change. In addition, the European Union is a committed leader in the area of climate action. This was clearly demonstrated at the COP21 Climate Change Conference, and implementing the Paris Agreement, of course, on the ground will be difficult, but it is a commitment that the European Union embraces. We've already come some way, where greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture have dropped by 24% since 1990. Agriculture and forestry must continue delivering on the EU's ambitious pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions even further. And I'm happy to remind you that the farming sector is already contributing a growing share of the European Union's total output of renewable energy, with almost 10% provided in 2012, and in the same year, forestry contributed with 47%. This is very promising for the road ahead. We will also continue to work closely with our developing country partners to assist them wherever possible in meeting their own SDG targets. We have very strong links at multiple levels, including in international fora. So sharing experience, addressing problems together, is the smartest way of achieving our ambitions. But we mustn't take our eye off the bottom line either. These challenges will only be solved with significant investment from the public and private sectors. The reality is that in today's squeezed global economy, aid budgets are under pressure, needs far outweigh capacity, development aid and emergency assistance are still at the forefront of our efforts, and the private sector has the resources to transform the agricultural economy of developing countries. Under SDG 2, there is an onus on all parties to make markets work. This means galvanizing responsible private investment in developing countries, promoting smart, sustainable and profitable farming practices. And I'm proud to say that the European Union is making real progress on this front. Just before World Food Day last year, we launched a process to reach out to agricultural businesses in the EU and persuade them to invest in African agricultural growth. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which provides a blueprint for implementing the SDGs, makes it clear that developing countries have the primary responsibility for their own development. And in the coming years, we will continue to persuade our EU agribusinesses to enter partnerships with African and developing country farmers' organisations to provide responsible investments. Ladies and gentlemen, the CAP is more attuned now to its political responsibilities when it comes to sustainable development. European agricultural policy is assuming leadership in implementing the relevant SDGs. And this leadership will evolve further and indeed deepen in the coming years, working on its own steam and in tandem with our EU and international policies. The European Commission's commitment is this: we must continue on this path, and we will do so. We will honour our commitments. European farmers and our food industry will have to play and will play a constructive role, and as always adapt to new societal challenges. And we will help them wherever possible. We are ready again to lead on this issue from the front. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay, so we've got two gentlemen here, one of whom takes the global perspective, one of whom, by definition, due to his job, looks at things from a European perspective. So let's just unpick a little bit of what you've said. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to leave time for the audience to ask the real questions in a moment. Mr. De Silva, I sometimes struggle in the context of this debate about agriculture, sustainability, delivering enough food for all of the people of the world, and yet ensuring that we address the climate change agenda and do not destroy the planet. I sometimes struggle with this word intensification. In your view, are we still talking about a global agricultural sector which needs to improve yields per hectare, which needs to invest massively in new technologies, biotechnologies, technology transfers to the developing parts of the world? Is intensification still a key part of the agenda or not?
No doubt it is. To feed the 9 billion or more, we will need to intensify the production. but not exactly the way that we have been doing.
Well, that's the point, because to me, intensification often comes with a climate change cost.
Most of the time, yes, especially when we use irrigation and most of the chemicals available. But is it also possible to do in other ways? For example, a more organic approach, many other technologies like hydroponic production. There's many other new technologies that are becoming available that will help us to overcome this trade-off between intensification and, let's say, land degradation, bad use of natural resources, etc.
All right. So in a sense, you're saying one can have the cake and eat it too. You can deliver improved, increased intensification and address the sustainability issues. So I guess if that's true, we should celebrate that.
Yeah.
The other issue I want to ask you about, and then I'm going to turn to Mr. Hogan, is trade and the nature of the global trade in agricultural products, foodstuffs. Do you see that there is a need for fundamental change in the global food trade?
Yes, no doubt also, because we have been thinking only about commodities. Commodities are the most important, no doubt, but we don't eat only commodities. We need a lot of other things. And more and more, these local circuits of food production and food consumption is proving a good result for boosting agriculture at local level in some of the private areas, rural areas. You don't have other alternative except agriculture and related activities. So building local circuits of food production and food consumption, not only based on trade at global level, it's a big improvement.
You're saying in this future, and we're trying to be concrete about what's going to happen over the next 15 years, the term of these sustainable development goals. Are you saying that you believe we are going to see less focus, less emphasis on the intercontinental trade in food and more focus on the development, as you say, of those more localized chains?
In fact, it is already happening. We have a big progress now in regional trade. European community is a good example of that. But also other regions are improving their trade based on agreements like Mercosur, African trades, regional trades, and so on. So I think so that we will be able to have more products trade at a regional level than at the global level.
You sit at the top of the FAO, and obviously you take a view as to the global trends. Just briefly, you know, these SDGs, these goals for agriculture, they're talking about zero hunger, eradicating hunger around the world, at the same time as delivering a much more sustainable global agricultural food system and ensuring long-term food security around the world. In 15 years, is that really deliverable?
What I have to say about hunger, I have no doubt, because we produce enough food for all. It's an issue of better access to food. If we could combine the policies that we have now, productive policies, with, let's say, social protection schemes, like cash transfer and others, will allow the poorest to have access to food. And that will solve the problem of hunger. But as I said, we don't see that the only problem now is hunger. Hunger perhaps is the main problem. It's what I call the unfinished agenda that we have from the past. But the way we are solving the problem of hunger, we are creating another problem of nutrition, bad nutrition. Among that, obesity is becoming a big challenge now. So what I'm saying is that we are finishing an agenda that started with the Green Revolution in the 70s, last century. And we have now available another set of new technologies that we need to put in place to overcome the challenge we have now, including climate change impacts.
Okay. Phil Hogan, I don't know, did you hear Achim Steiner?
I did.
Yeah, and his message is quite simple. The time is now. You know, enough talk already. Let's talk concrete actions that can be taken now to make these sustainable development goals real. And obviously we're focused on the ones that concern agriculture and food today. So let's be really concrete. You know, what is going to have to change in Europe in terms of agricultural systems now and in the next few years, the short run, to mean that Europe can honestly say we are doing our maximum to make these goals reality?
Well, I think in the last reform of the CAP, it was the first steps were taken in terms of recognizing the importance of the environmental dimension in our objectives in terms of food production. And where 30% of the money and income that a farmer gets in the European Union now has to comply with certain environmental obligations, and where 50% of our money in the rural development programs are responding to actions in relation to environment and climate. That's a start.
You can raise those percentages, can't you?
Well, I can assure you that I have a lot of obligations to raise the money, but we also have obligations elsewhere in terms of migration and refugees.
Yeah, but,
if I can hold on to my budget, Stephen, I'll be doing very well, I can tell you on this occasion.
But this is precisely the point. There are always going to be many other demands on an EU budget.
There is.
But even within the agriculture budget, you then have to divvy up to prioritize what is most important. So I'm saying those figures, 30%, 50% you've just talked about, they could be higher, and maybe they're going to have to be higher.
Well, I have to respond as Commissioner to the will of the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. But of course I can make a proposal to do certain things, and we can look at these things in the context of a midterm review, which we were looking at for 2017. So it's not far away where we'll be evaluating all of these measures. In fact, already we're looking to see, are the environmental obligations that were imposed in the CAP in the reform in 2015, are they working or not? And
what's the answer?
We don't have an answer yet because I don't have the results yet until June. But we will have very soon some studies that will indicate one way or another, and we will be discussing to see how we can do things better, because there is no getting away from the fact that the environmental dimension is here to stay, and we have to deepen our relationship between, and interdependence, as Akin said, between agriculture and the environment.
Well, I'll tell you what, not just Akin said, but also Mr. De Silva, he said, you know, in politics there is systemic failure, at least systemic problems, because by and large, the guy who's responsible for agriculture doesn't spend enough time talking to and cooperating with the guy, or why I say guy, man or woman who is responsible for public health policy, the man or woman who's responsible for environmental policy. There's too much silo thinking in government, whether it be at national or European or even global level. Do you reckon that's true of the EU?
Well, maybe it used to be, but we are trying to change. The new system of vice presidents has allowed this commission to break down some of the silos that have been there. And I certainly I'm collaborating with the Commissioner for the Environment on research and innovation under the chairmanship of a vice president, in order to break down exactly what you said, the silos in terms of integrating policies better between each other. I think that is very welcome. As a former Minister for the Environment in the Republic of Ireland, I certainly have learned to abhor silos very much. And I see great progress being made under this Commission in order to break down those, to have common objectives in line with what we are discussing today.
Another thing that Mr. De Silva just said when I was asking him about trade is that, you know, he foresees over the next 15 years less emphasis on intercontinental food trade, exports, you know, and more focus on perhaps helping emerging economy regions, whether it be in Africa or Asia, to produce more food themselves and get away from a need to import a lot of their food from the intensively farmed high production areas, maybe like Europe. You buy into that? Is that part of Europe's agenda, to go out and help producers elsewhere in the world do better for themselves and need less food import from Europe?
Well, we not only do that, we do it in concrete actions. We have tariff-free access for a lot of products from the least developed countries. in the Valletta Summit in November, the European Union and Africa for the first time recognized that we will have a migration problem from Africa if we don't do major investment in terms of food for the people of Africa. And thirdly, in the WTO talks before Christmas in Nairobi, we concluded a major step forward, in my view, in terms of removing a lot of the trade distorting export measures for the least developed countries.
What do you say?
That's action in the last year alone.
So what do you say to the producers in here, European producers, who are saying, Jesus, the Commissioner's killing off my business. You know, I rely on a very vigorous export market for the foods I produce, and he's just in the process of killing it off.
Well, if they interpret it that way, it certainly is a wrong interpretation from you. And I can assure you that I'm not killing off, because we have to have a balance between good environmental practice and food security. This is the challenge that producers and policymakers have. And if the farming community and the producers are not going to adapt to these practices, we're going to have some difficulties in the future in terms of the medium and long term. And they're not stupid people, farmers. They know that they need good soil fertility. They know they need good resources for the future, including water. And who are going to look after the landscape? Who are going to engage in these implementation programs of environmental good practice if we don't have farmers? Are we going to set up another United Nations agency to do it? I don't think so. I think we have people on the ground that are well able to do the job. If they're incentivized to do it, sustainability will be the key. And that's, farmers are very realistic people. I believe that they will rise to this challenge.
So farmers in Europe, you know, my dad, you know, bless him, he's not farming anymore, he's a bit too old, he's 85. But for many, many years, my dad would be so proud every year that on his farm in Lincolnshire in the east of England, his wheat yield, you know, it would go up from years ago 2.5 tons per, sorry, we use acres, yes. 2.5 tons an acre to 3 tons an acre to 3.5 tons an acre. You know, that was a badge of honor. Do farmers need to get away from that kind of thinking, particularly in Europe?
Well, I think there is an agri-tech revolution happening in agriculture, which most farmers realize, where precision agriculture will meet a lot of the objectives that we're speaking about in terms of producing more with less. We are using too much inputs, too much pesticides, too much of a lot of things that are harmful to the environment at the moment. And if we engage properly in the precision agriculture agenda, we'll be able to reduce those inputs, have a more efficient agriculture and more margin of profitability for the farmer. And that's the challenge for me, to help farmers to achieve that.
All right. Well, that's enough chuntering from me. Let's get some sensible questions now from our audience. So hands up, everybody. I do think we've got the mics around. So let me start with that lady there. She's just taken her glasses off to prepare. So, madam, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Anna Jones with Have Hamburg. I have a question about the relationship, the synergies that we have talked about, the issue of involving the civil society, and my question is about cities. How do we make the connection between agriculture, rural development, and then finally cities where all these are the users and the consumers? Thank you.
Right. Who would like to take that on? You look like you would, Commissioner.
We had a very good discussion about this at the Berlin Green Week under the excellent chairmanship of Minister Christian Smith. And it's how to exploit the potential of the suburban area in terms of providing the sustainable food in a more sustainable way to our citizens in the cities. And also, I think we, as Graziano has mentioned, we can do a lot more in organizing ourselves better with producer organizations, cooperative organizations. And many of the problems in the European Union as well, particularly in the eastern part of Europe, is that we're not properly organized. Of course, this is a bigger issue altogether in other parts of the world. So we need to invest in organizing people to help organize themselves to be able to identify the markets for the particular products involved, particularly in the suburban areas. That will develop a greater relationship in a sustainable way between the cities and the rural areas.
Mr. De Silva, is it good news that right around the world, urbanization continues apace, that more and more people live in cities, fewer and fewer people tend to live in the countryside and the rural areas? I mean, in terms of being efficient, having the best model for feeding the world, is urbanization a good thing?
Well, you know, I don't like one solution fits all. I think that we have good and bad examples of urbanization. We have many cities that we cannot live anymore, starting with my city, São Paulo. We have very good examples of urbanization, people moving from the countryside to have better access to education, health service, etc., water.
And ironically, maybe better access to food too.
Better access to food too, yes. Yes, no doubt.
Okay, let's try and squeeze as many questions as we can. Madam, you there? Yep, microphone is coming. There you go.
Hello, my name is Louisa Heenahan. I'm from the One Campaign.
Speak real close to the mic so we can hear you. There you go.
Okay, I'm from the One Campaign. My question is directed to Mr. De Silva. I'd like to ask about the Nutrition for Growth campaign this year, and I'd like to know about the involvement of the FAO and what you personally see as the goals and objectives of the summit this year.
Right. The Nutrition for Growth campaign, what can you tell us about it?
Well, this is one good example of how civil society must be engaged with the governments and the private sector. Nutrition issues affect all of us as consumers and as producers. So we very welcome. We are working together on this one campaign. And I hope that we can continue to do that. The crucial point for me is that we need better organization of the farmers. We cannot continue to address them isolated. We need to organize better the family farmers. They are too little to survive alone. This is the message. In this new world, we need them to get together. Not only because they are small ones, but the issues that they will be facing are not individual problems, are collective problems. Water management, climate change impacts, soil degradation, deforestation. These are not individual problems. These are global problems, universal problems.
Okay. Sorry, ma'am, we're going to try and get as many questions in as we can. I always fail to properly represent people at the back, and there is a hand up at the back, and it means the microphone has got to mount the stairs. Here comes the microphone charging up the stairs. So, ma'am, well done for making yourself known to me. Off you go, right at the back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Lies Krijnes from Oxfam. Very quick question. We hear a lot about the importance of the role of the private sector to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and we definitely agree as Oxfam. But we are quite worried about the new agenda that says development will only succeed with the involvement of private sector. Minister Phil Hogan, or Commissioner Phil Hogan, talked about how we're encouraging European agribusiness to get involved in the African continent, including to stop migration coming from Africa. My key question is, what are some of the conditions and concerns that you're going to attach to private sector involvement to not stop, to not get involved in land grabbing, to ensure that communities can actually benefit from this investment, and that we don't just have a new export sector for Europe?
Interesting. So, you know, you're full of the joys of getting the private sector heavily involved in the next phase of sort of agricultural development in the developing world, but the Oxfam concern is that exploitative practices, abusive relationships, frankly, rapacious corporations will move in to this space that you see. How are you going to ensure, what regulatory framework controls you're going to put in place to ensure that doesn't happen?
Well, first of all, we do need the private sector involved. We do not have the money or the resources in the public institutions in order to be able to deal with this enormous problem. And we have to do something now. We cannot put it off for another 10 or 15 years. We are developing partnerships between private sector companies in agriculture with particular provinces in various states, for example, in Nigeria. Arla, for example, is a well-known food company in Denmark, is developing partnerships with a particular province in Nigeria, and we can replicate that, I'm sure, in various other companies around the European Union. But I think that people get involved in these particular matters in the private sector at that level for the best of motives.
Do you?
I do.
Well,
I think ultimately,
isn't the profit motive the best of
I
motives
think
as far as they're concerned?
Yeah, but I think they have a corporate social responsibility, and we use the goodwill that we have with them at the moment for that purpose. Of course, I agree that there will have to be a regulatory regime put in place in order to prevent some of the practices you've alluded to. But let's give people the benefit of the doubt initially. We have a serious problem. We want private sector involved. We want people with expertise to give greater knowledge and innovation and good practice to our people in Africa to be able to not to grow their own products themselves, rather than actually heading for a good address in the European Union in the future.
You feel the same way, Mr. De Silva? Private sector, benefit of the doubt has to be given, and you're all for them doing as much as they can, as quickly as they can?
I think so, but let me make a point. When we refer to private sector, we think about financial contribution. I think that we should not expect that. My own experience, since the time I was minister, is that the private sector, if they don't have, let's say, a good environment, they will not cooperate. What we should expect from the private sector is the support for the policy. The political support from private sector is very important. And finally, one point, we should remember that farmers are also part of private sector.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. We always refer to private sectors thinking about big companies. No, family farmers are part of it.
Yeah, good point. Right, I'm going to take one more, and then we're going to break, because we all need a coffee, and we need to perhaps use our phones. To be fair, I'm going to go down here toward the front, because we've been at the back. The gentleman with the glasses who's got his hand up, he's standing up right behind you, ma'am. There you go. Right, go on.
Thank you very much. I take off my glasses. My name is Matthias Bergman. I head the Baltic Sea Action Group. Our task is to save the Baltic Sea. It's dying because of nutrients leaking into that sea. This is a very inspiring discussion, and you, Mr. De Silva, you just mentioned the point here. The private sector, that's the farmers. So why don't we spell it out? I think it's very clear. There are very, very few nowadays state-owned farms. Another thing is that 3 years ago, this type of discussion, or the wording you're using now, was totally impossible. So I think you have made a lot of progress. So this is really inspiring. Nevertheless, those in power, meaning having the power and using it, if they don't really understand that they are part of the ecosystem or the biosphere called the Earth, we will never survive here. So that is the standpoint for all, must be the standpoint for all measures taken ever. And this is serious business. You said, Mr. Stucker, that we are in serious waters here. So actually, if we just talk and don't actually believe in this, or actually, to put it bluntly, understand it, we will not make it. So let's start from there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, it wasn't exactly a question, but it, I suppose, is quite a neat way of ending the session. For both of you, the speaker said it's inspiring in a way that we're having the debate is of the nature it is right now, and the focus so much on the sustainability agenda, and these SDGs have been laid out, and there's so much good talk out there, sort of responsible talk. We're all in this together, and it's the future of our planet. As producers and politicians and regulators and consumers all have to work together. But the point is, it's all about the actions, not the words right now. So a final brief thought from you both. If there is one action that you think will tell us whether we're serious, not just in terms of words, but actions, what would that action be? What would be your number one priority? You start.
The number one priority which we would like to make progress more quickly to reflect it in policy is provide adequate, good quality water.
Good, that's succinct, short and sharp. Mr. De Silva?
I'm really concerned about the governance capacity to deal with the SDGs. If they still organize in a silos basis, we will not move forward.
And right now, that's what you see, is it?
Yes.
Governments that still aren't having that broader,
Unfortunately,
cross-ministerial, cross-discipline thinking.
exactly.
Okay, well, that's food for thought, that's for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a sort of pause point in our discussions. We're going to come back at 1:30 to talk practical stuff with all sorts of different, sorry to use the word, but stakeholders, from producers to private companies in the ag sector, a lot of people on this stage talking practical, concrete steps. But for now, it's time for coffee. I know a lot of you will want to talk on the phone and figure out what's going on in this city. Enjoy the coffee break, and we'll see you at 1:30. Thank you very much, and thank you to my panel.